ChatGPT's Kazal, I missed my shot to stop a wedding by exactly 7 minutes, and that 7 minutes turned into almost 4 decades of silence, a lie that protected a life, and a knock on my door from a stranger who called me dad. Hey folks, it's Hank from Mind Blowing Stories, coming to you from my little basement studio with the crooked banner and the good coffee. Before we dive in, I need to say this, because it really does sit heavy on my chest. 96% of you watching are not subscribed. I check every week and it still says the same number. That stings, and I'll tell you why. I am 67 years old, retired, and these stories are pretty much what keeps my nights from going hollow. So please, if you like real-life tales that make your heart beat a little faster, hit that subscribe button. It means the world. Give the video a like if it earns it, and drop a comment with your own what might have been. All right, let me tell you about Claire, the July sky over Ashland County, and how a busted radiator, a bad man, and a brave decision shaped the kind of love that can't be undone, not by time and not by distance. I met Claire Bennett in the summer of 1979. If you lived around the Great Lakes back then, you remember what a different kind of summer it was. Gas lines, a few factories already shuttering, a strange optimism anyway, like the country was catching its breath. I was 21, a junior at the community college, working nights at the Ford stamping plant in Maumee, and afternoons changing oil at Donnie's garage to pay for school books, and rent for a halfway decent room above a barber shop that smelled like old cologne and barbicide. Folks were buying pint cans of Strohs, mowing their lawns in straight little stripes, and I was a knot of engine grease and big ideas, with a second-hand guitar I never really learned to play. Every Thursday night, I'd walk to the Golden Basket Diner on Star Avenue. I didn't go for the meatloaf or the pie or because I wanted to flirt with the waitresses. I went because the owner, Donna, had a little record player behind the counter, and if you slipped her a quarter, she'd play Springsteen or Elvis or Patsy Cline while she refilled coffee. Music was the only thing that made me feel like I wasn't being hammered into a shape I'd never chosen. One muggy Thursday, there's this new waitress. Wore a blue dress you could tell she ironed herself and white canvas shoes with laces she had to tuck because they were too long. Her hair was the color of wet wheat. She had one of those easy, composed smiles that say, I know something you do not, and I'm going to be kind about it. When she put down my coffee, I said, You're new. She said, Newish. Claire. I'm usually mornings. I said, Good to meet you, Miss Newish Claire. She laughed, and it wasn't a tinkly little sound like in the movies. It was a solid laugh, like a door that opens and stays open. She set down my plate, patted the counter, and moved on, calling folks sweetie and honey with the kind of warmth that made you believe she meant both. I watched her that first night caring for a couple older gentlemen with the slow hands that come after a small stroke. She cut their meat, divided it so neat on the plate, and she filled their coffee with a tenderness that stuck me like a pin. On my way out, I put a folded note under my saucer because I was a coward in those days. It said, If you ever want to hear real music, there's a band behind the Kroger on Saturday. I'll be the guy pretending he knows how to play. I signed it Hank from the Ford plant. On Saturday, I showed up in my best jeans and a shirt. My mother said made my shoulders look too big, and there she was leaning against the wall near the cigarette machine, those two long laces tucked neatly into her shoes. She said, You're late. I said, No, I'm early. She said, No, you're late to your own life. Come on, musician. And just like that, she took my hand. That was Claire. She always knew where the beat was and when to bring you into it. We danced and laughed and then sat on the curb and talked. You know how it goes when you're young and honest without yet knowing it might cost you. She told me she'd grown up east of there in a town called Jericho, a two-church place with a white water tower that said, Home of the Panthers. She was boarding with a family while she worked at the diner, and took classes in nursing. I told her I was studying industrial maintenance and how I planned to leave for Florida one winter and never come back. She asked me if I was running from something or to something. I told her I didn't know yet. She said, "Hank, you're the most hopeful person I've ever met. You just don't want to admit it." We started meeting on Tuesdays on my lunch break and Sundays after her church. She didn't push her faith, but she had this way of closing her eyes when she prayed over a cheeseburger that made me believe there are quiet, secret rooms inside some people, and when they kneel in them, they're not alone. By August, I'd learned the scar on her forearm was from a bicycle wreck when she was 10, that she drank her coffee black with 2 sugars and ate the sugar first, and that the only thing she was truly afraid of was getting trapped. Not spiders, not thunderstorms, not big men yelling, but the trap of a life chosen by someone else. She said it like I knew already. Maybe she could tell I did. She met my mother on a Sunday afternoon. My mother, quiet Gloria from Parma, who wore house shoes even out to the mailbox, made peach cobbler and said, "Claire, you must be a nurse already. You carry yourself like one." Claire blushed and said, "Someday." My mother looked at me and in that one look said, "Don't you mess this up." Mothers can make an essay out of a glance. We took drives to the reservoir with a thermos of coffee and a cooler with bologna sandwiches. We would park on the high bend where you could see the water catch the sun and then run it back like silver ribbon. When we kissed, it felt like we were signing a promise none of us wrote down, but both understood. One evening at the reservoir, when the air was like breath you could see, we were sitting in my old Nova, and Claire got very quiet. You have to know she was never quiet that way. When Claire went quiet, it meant the road had turned, and you were about to notice a new scenery. She said, "Hank, there's something I have to tell you." I said, "Okay." She took a breath so deep it lifted my hand where it rested on her chest. She said, "My last name is not Bennett. It is Bennett now because it needs to be. It used to be Caldwell. I left home in Jericho quickly. I left because I thought I was in love with a man who was not good, and I thought leaving was the way to be free of him. He is not a man you can wave off. He is the kind of man who collects." She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel like she was counting. "He is older than me by 12 years. His name is David Turner." If you are expecting the part where I puffed up and said I'm not afraid of this David Turner, then you are expecting a different man. I swallowed and asked, "Were you in danger?" She nodded. I asked, "Are you in danger now?" She let out another breath. "I don't think so," she said. "The sheriff in Jericho is his father's friend. If I am in danger, it is not because of something I did. It is because of what he cannot stand, which is that I loved someone else, and I left." "Someone else," I said. "Because I am simple." She looked hard at me. "You," she said. "I loved you the second night, when you mispronounced focaccia like it was a kind of motorcycle, and didn't mind being corrected by Donna. You listen with your whole face. I loved that." I squeezed the steering wheel so hard my knuckles clicked. A sane man would have asked deeper questions then. I wasn't sane when it came to Claire. She leaned her forehead against mine and said, "If you want to stop seeing me, I will understand." "I have told you enough to make anyone nervous." I said, "No one saves me but you." That is how young people talk. But I meant it, and I almost mean it now. We chose to keep moving forward. We planned to leave in late September when my plant closed for maintenance and her class had a 2-week break. We would drive as far as Louisville and see about work there. We told almost no one. If you are wondering why I didn't tell my mother, it is because I was selfish and because I wanted one thing in my life that belonged only to me. Then the trouble started. It was one of those hot weeks when the air has weight and everyone makes mistakes. A man came to the diner tall and hard in a button-down shirt tucked so sharp it cut his belt line. He sat where my stool usually was. Claire was at the far end serving coffee. Donna looked at me as I stepped through the door and put a hand up like you might to stop a car. I steered to the other end of the counter and took a menu I didn't need. The man never looked my way, but he moved his cup 3 times, so she'd have to come closer. When she finally did, he ran his finger along the inside of her wrist and smiled. It was a weird smile, like a man who knows the end to a joke you haven't heard, and he can't wait for you to fumble toward it. Donna said into my ear, "That is him. That is the Turner boy. He's been in 3 times this week." It took an ocean of restraint for me not to walk down that counter and plant my fist into the center of his smile. Instead, when Claire came to me, I said softly, "You good?" She said, "I will be," and her eyes were brave but tired. That night, someone cut the brake lines on Donna's old Buick. She found out when she backed out of her driveway, rolled into the street, and only stopped because she hit a trash can hard that shoved her into a neighbor's lawn. She wasn't hurt. Donna said she had no enemies. The cops came, filled out a report, wrote inconclusive where the reason should go, and left it to sit like a damp towel over a hot stove. Donna made a joke later about the Buick saving her life by being too low for excitement. No one laughed. 2 days after that, I came out of the plant after a midnight shift and found my Nova with every window shattered. It looked like a cake after the kids got into it. The security guard shook his head and wrote vandalism on a clipboard and asked if I had enemies. I thought about the tall man in the diner with the weird smile and said, maybe. They never found out what happened to my windows. They never even looked very hard. We moved our plans up. We rented a little U-Haul, and I borrowed a radiator from an old Camaro that had been rusting behind Donnie's. We decided to meet at the reservoir on a Thursday evening. I would clock out early. We would pack what Claire had into the U-Haul, head south, and find out if putting miles between yourself and trouble is the same as making a decision. It is not, but we thought it might be. I was ready an hour early. Donnie had bought me a case of beer I didn't need and shook my hand so hard that my ring finger popped. When I hit the turnpike, a steam hiccuped up from under my hood. I killed the engine, coasted into the emergency lane, and watched the temperature gauge climb like a boy on a jungle gym. The borrowed radiator had given up. I sat there smelling antifreeze and hearing the whoomp-whoomp of semis and cussed in that old soft way you do when you're trying to make a word long enough to contain a whole life. This was before cell phones. I hitchhiked the 2 miles to the gas station. The clerk let me use the phone. I dialed the diner and got busy signal. I dialed Donna's house and got nothing. I should have dialed 100 numbers, and when none of them answered, run the 2 miles like a letter on fire. But I am a man who was raised to fix things with my hands. So I bought a roll of tape and a gallon of water and hitchhiked back, taped the radiator hose, and fed water like a paramedic to a man with a bullet hole. I got the Nova choked and coughing to the street near the reservoir, and then I ran and I got there 7 minutes after we'd set. Claire waited on the bench we'd always used when the reservoir looked like an invitation. When she heard my feet, she stood too fast and her purse fell and a single photograph slithered out like it had been waiting for a moment to see daylight. She had been crying and then she was laughing, that door open laugh. And then she was crying again. I said, "I am here." I said it twice because I needed to say it twice. She said, "Hank." I waited. I showed her my hands all cut up from the radiator, like they were proof that I had wanted what I said I wanted. She ran her thumbs along the cuts like she could heal them, just by knowing they were there. She said, "Hank, I waited, but I also need to tell you something, and if I don't tell you now, I might not tell you later, and then it will be a worse kind of lie." I nodded because I would nod to whatever she said. She put the photograph back into her purse and then changed her mind and handed it to me. It was of her at some fair, hair tied up in a red scarf, holding a paper cone of cotton candy, smiling with that composed smile. A man's arm was around her waist, not the tall man. This man was younger, maybe 25, with thick brown hair and a squared jaw. His hand was on her hip with such confidence that my own knees gave a little. On the back was a date in blue pen. August 12th, she said, Mark Chandler asked me to marry him last night. He is a good man. He is a youth pastor, and he fixes toasters on the side. And when a neighbor's dog ran off, he whistled it back with his hands in his pockets. He will not ever touch me in anger. I told him I needed to think. I told him there was someone else. He asked if the someone else was good. I told him the someone else had a better heart than me and could build a table with his hands. I could hear the wind in the eucalyptus like it was a whisper. I said, "Did you say yes?" She said I needed to give an answer by 6. It was 6:10 when I called to say I was sorry for making him wait, and 6:17 when I told him no. And it is 6:27 now, and we can still go if you want to go. 7 minutes. I had been 7 minutes late to the bend in the road, where all the little decisions feed into one big one. I said, "Let's go." I said it like a prayer. She nodded, and we went to the little parking lot where the U-Haul should have been. There was nothing. No U-Haul. Not a scrap. We stood like children who wandered away from their mother in a grocery store. On the still air, we heard a horn twice from across the hill, and then a crunch, like maybe the sound of a truck door slamming. She gripped my elbow and turned me towards the west, where you could see the road. A man stood beside a Chevy truck, tall and hard. He did not look our way. He got in the Chevy and pulled out with the U-Haul wobbly behind him. I recognized that posture. I recognized that slight turn of the neck. David Turner had just taken our leaving like a toy from a child, and the sheriff would label it inconclusive. I chased him 3 steps, and then Claire stopped me because she had a hand like a promise. She said, "Not like this. He wants you to be mad right now. I will go back to my room and I will work the morning shift, and we will meet again Sunday, and we will try again. We will try again until we do not have to try anymore." But Sunday morning never came like it should have. At 3 a.m., someone busted the window in Claire's boarding house and set fire to the curtain with a bottle of something that curls your nose hairs. No one died. The family woke up and pulled Claire out with them. They told the police they did not know it was Claire who was being targeted, and the police wrote the word "suspicious" on their clipboard, like the word was a lid for a pot of boiling soup. The boarding family asked Claire to leave because fear is biggest when it wakes you at 3 in the morning. I went to the rooming house, but the landlord would not let me in. He said I was not on the lease, like that meant I was not in the story. I slid a letter under her door with $200 I could spare if I ate more ramen and less meat for a month. In the letter I wrote, "What passes for poetry when you are young and full of a certain stubborn brand of love. There are men who make their bones looking for trouble to fix. I tried to be one. I drove down to Jericho. I walked into the sheriff's office and said, 'There is a man bothering a woman who does not want to be bothered.' The deputy behind the desk looked at me without moving his face. He said, 'We will look into it.' I asked what that meant. He said, 'We will look into it.' I could hear the clicking of typewriter keys in the back. They were writing something on someone else's life that would make this one look already resolved. I walked out and went to the church at the edge of town, where they keep the baptismal records in a little wooden file. I found nothing there for me and everything there for folks named Saxton and Rhodes who had been born, married, and buried under that steeple for 100 years. I went to the diner in Jericho, a different diner, and asked if anyone knew David Turner. A woman in a pink uniform said, "Oh, honey, most girls in this county knew David Turner." She took my hand in both of hers, like she was blessing me before a storm. On Tuesday, Claire was gone. Donna said she had come in early and whispered, "I can't get anyone hurt." Then she folded her apron, kissed Donna's cheek, and left out the kitchen door. The boarding house landlord had a new lock on her door by afternoon. He said her rent was paid through the week, and he had a waiting list for that room. You know how something breaks and you try to fix it by adding more pressure, and then there's a point where pressure does the opposite of fixing. I pushed too hard. I went to Jericho, and I found David Turner. He was at the bowling alley lounge, parked on a bar stool like a king on a narrow throne. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, so even his forearm veins looked like they were flexing. His smile was still wrong. I said his name. He said, "Do I know you?" I said, "Not yet." He said, "Then keep it that way." I should have left. I did not leave. I talked about Claire like his hearing wasn't real. I said, "She isn't yours." He said, "She isn't yours either." He went outside and I followed, and we stood under a light that flickered like something holy was just out of tune. He said, "You are young. You will forget. She will thank me later." I hit him. I am not a fighter. I was scared, and scared punches go sideways. Mine hit his jaw in a way that made both of us look surprised. He fell and stood, and then he laughed, and the laugh was a little like falling down the stairs. He said, "That a boy," and the first cop car rolled up like a dog who'd been waiting for a whistle. I spent the night in a cell that smelled like beer socks and dust. In the morning, the judge said, "Pay a fine and keep your nose clean for 6 months and stay out of Jericho." I paid the fine and I nodded and I stayed out of Jericho. I never saw David Turner again. I wish that part ended with a movie line, but it ends with a receipt and a shaking hand. I wrote letters to Claire and left them with Donna because I didn't know where else to put them. Donna said she sent one to an aunt in Akron. I stood in line at the post office 3 towns over and mailed one to a P.O. box that a friend of a friend said might be hers. I waited at another diner on weekends because Chaos had a bill attached to it, and I wasn't rich. Time, the heavy thing no one can lift and no one can stop, went on. I did what people do. I worked. I saved. I stopped going to the reservoir. I dated someone named Kelly who liked baseball and quiet movies, and we were decent to each other, and then we weren't because the space where Claire lived in me made everything else feel like I was pretending. I told Kelly the truth. I slept alone a while. I learned what quiet really is. Then, one day a letter came addressed to me, with no return address, written in neat hand on a card someone might use to thank a neighbor for watering plants. It said only this: "Hank, I am safe. I am marrying Mark Chandler. He is kind. I am telling you because the truth deserves telling. I will not ask you not to come because I do not want you to hurt. But perhaps you should not. Love does not owe a witness. Please forgive me. Please forgive the world that made this the best choice. Do not come to Jericho." I stared at that card for a long time. I ran my thumb over the pressed letters. I thought about what love owes and what it doesn't. Then I put on my only suit. I drove to Jericho. I parked around the side of the church so no one could see the Nova with the patched radiator hoses. I stood under a maple tree and practiced a sentence. I tried, Claire. Just come with me. I tried. We can still go. I tried. You never needed anyone's permission to be brave. None of it sounded right coming from my mouth. The wedding was at 2:30. I planned to walk into the back of the church at 2:20 and stand where the smell of old hymnals could reach my lungs and say something quiet that made nothing worse and maybe something better. But the radiator patch gave and I had to pull over. I used the jug of water in the trunk. A farmer in a plaid shirt gave me a ride the last half mile. He let me off at the stop sign at Cedar and Second and said, "Good luck, son," like he knew exactly what kind of trouble I was in. I ran the last stretch. I was 7 minutes late again. I heard applause inside that little church, and I knew what it meant. I stood outside and listened to the organ like it was a birth and a funeral rolled into one song. When they came out, Claire saw me. Her face did that thing faces do when a memory hits it hard. She squeezed Mark's hand, kissed a little girl on the top of her head who had been the ring bearer, and walked straight to me. She said, "Thank you for not making me choose you in front of God." I said, "I don't think God sets these exact tests." She said, "I think God knows I am a weaker creature than he thought, and he is giving me a chance to keep a promise I already made." She touched my cheek for a second like a seal on a letter, and then she went to the reception, and I walked the long way around the block. And then I drove home very slowly behind a tractor, because going slow meant I could pretend if I needed to. Life slid forward. I got a promotion and more gray hair. I married a woman named Linda, who had a laugh that rolled out like summer thunder and a temper to match. We didn't durably match. We had kindness, but not patience. We didn't have any children. Linda liked karaoke, and I liked sitting in the back booth and counting how many beer steins were hanging from the ceiling. That kind of math is not a marriage. She left on a Tuesday with a note that said, "I need someone who isn't haunted by an invisible woman." It was a good line and not untrue. I folded that note into my wallet and carried it for 2 years as a little punishment. I fixed things. I laid laminate flooring in my mother's kitchen and replaced her porch light with one that didn't attract moths like a newspaper headline. I went fishing with my neighbor Walt, who caught nothing and called it the mercy of God. I drove down to Nashville one week and tried to learn a country song and came back with nothing recorded and a hat that didn't fit. I thought less and less of Claire at the times when thinking hurts. And then I thought of her in the quiet slots, the way you think of an old injury when it rains. Years turned into the kind of years you can stack like pancakes. The plan offered early retirement, and I took it. My knees didn't hurt yet, but they were making appointments with pain. I started the YouTube channel because my granddaughter, by marriage, Mia, said I had a voice that made people keep listening and a face that said, "I've seen a little, and it didn't kill me." I had no grandchildren by blood. My sister's kids brought their kids to me, and I got to practice grandpa without having to do the diapers. I called the channel Mind-Blowing Stories because Mia said that would get clicks, and I didn't argue because I didn't know a thumbnail from a thimble. One November afternoon 3 years ago, on a Monday, I was putting together a video about a man who built a boat in his yard and never finished it. I was telling a joke about procrastination. The doorbell rang. I thought it was Walt wanting to borrow my shop vac again. I opened the door and there was a woman who looked a little like the line of Lake Erie when it's dead calm. A steady horizon you can trust. She was about 35, smart eyes, hair the color of my sister's when she was young. She said, "Mr. Lawson." I said, "That's me." She said, "My name is June Chandler. I was told I should talk to you." Chandler. My brain did an old thing. It reached back and pushed out 2 words. Like they were on a spring, it pushed out Mark, and it pushed out Claire. I did not know yet why. But June knew why because she reached into her tote bag like a magician, who was also your accountant, and pulled out a folder with a hinge that had been opened many times. She said, "Can I come in?" I said yes, because my mother taught me to say yes to polite people. She sat at the kitchen table with the burn mark from where I set a hot pan in 1994, and she opened the folder. She laid out a copy of a birth certificate, some notarized letters, a photocopy of a photograph, and my own letterhead from the plan I'd used decades ago when I thought a return address made a thing more official. June said, I found a box in a facility in Harrisburg. It was in a dead letter office. You know what that is? I said, I do. She said, it had my name on it. Inside were letters to a woman named Claire and one spiral-bound notebook that had never been written in. Among the letters was one that was never mailed. The letter was from a woman named Donna. It said she had kept it because she did not know where to put it and was sorry in case sorry was needed. The letter said, Claire, your baby looks exactly like you. Call when you can. The letter was dated March 30th, 1980. She pointed at the birth certificate. The date was March 30th, 1980. The place was a little hospital 2 counties south of Jericho. Mother's name, it said Claire Chandler. Father's name was blank. My heart did not race the way you see in movies. It did a quieter thing. It slowed itself to a patient drumbeat, like it knew it might need to keep this up for some time. I said, You are telling me you are the daughter of Claire. She said, I am telling you I am the daughter of Claire. She said it without shame or fear. She said it like you say I am the daughter of the northern wind. And then she said, I was adopted by Mark and Claire. They made it official when I was 3 months old. We never told that part beyond close family because it didn't matter to how they loved me. My father, Mark, died when I was in college. My mother, Claire, died last year in a hospice in Harrisburg. She left instructions to send the box to the nearest facility that could hold dead letters until someone came and claimed it. She left a note that said, There is a man named Hank who deserves to know the truth if he still wants it. June tilted her head a little, the way Claire used to when she wanted to see what the light looked like on your face. I said, I am Hank from the Ford plant. June smiled. She said, I know. I recognized the handwriting from a 4-line note taped to the bottom of the U-Haul key I found in the box. The note said, Claire, I will meet you on the hill. I read that note and I thought, this is a man who will hold his promise in his teeth if he has to. I asked if I could hold the birth certificate. June pushed it to me like she was sliding a checkers piece. It got heavy as soon as it was in my hand. I looked at the name. June. I looked at the date. March 30th. I thought about 7 minutes at the reservoir, 7 minutes at the church, and a child born in between those times like the truth's own answer to the way we were lost. I asked the question you are not supposed to ask because it is too raw. I said, Am I your father? June did not blink. She said, I don't know. Mark could have been. He thought he was. Claire said there was a chance that you were. She said it was a good chance. But she did not want your life ruined if the men from Jericho decided to make your hurt their hobby. She said she chose safety over romance, because romance does not usually protect a baby at 3 in the morning when a window breaks. She signed an adoption paper that had Mark's name and her name and a blank spot where a father could have stood. She kept it blank because she said a blank can be a kind of grace when you need it. June folded her hands. I thought about how little choices can also be big choices, and how we don't get to know which is which until later. Sometimes much later. June said she had lost her mother to a slow leaving. She said it was lung cancer, from years of working in places that smelled like bleach and from nerves that never quit. She said her mother had been brave to the end. She said before the last week, her mother had dictated letters. June read one of the letters to me across that old burn mark. Hank, if the world has made it so that you and I can speak again, please hear me. I loved you. I left because I had to and because I had to protect a child I loved more than my own breath. Please forgive me for the places where it looks like I stopped loving you. I did not stop loving you. I did not want you to be a name on a stone in Jericho, because a man couldn't bear that I left him. I married Mark because he was good and strong, and we could build a fort around a baby together. I told him the truth. He said he would still stay. He said, love is not only a feeling, it is a project. I don't know what I owe you, but I know I owe you this truth. If you are reading or hearing this, it means I'm gone. Please be kind to the girl we made. Her name is June. Teach her the knot you use to tie down furniture when you drive a U-Haul in a crosswind. She will need that knot. I couldn't speak for a while. June poured both of us water. She wore a silver ring on a chain around her neck. She said her mother had worn it since she was 19. It was not a wedding band. It was a ring she bought with tips at the diner. She had worn it on the same chain when she was young. The chain had a spring clasp that you can only close if you have steady hands. I imagined her steady hands closing that clasp. June said, "There is another thing." She slid a small bag across the table. Inside were photographs. Claire leaning into a map in a rest stop. Claire grilling hot dogs. Claire and a little girl. June under a blanket fort with their noses touching. Claire sitting on a stoop with a teenager who had dark hair and a grin like he got away with something small. Then a photograph of a man with a toolbox and a baby on his lap. The man was me, a duplicate of a photograph I hadn't seen in years, taken on one of those days when a cousin handed me a baby at a cookout. I looked behind the baby's head, and there was Claire just outside the frame, a reflection in a window. I hadn't noticed her in that reflection the first time I saw the photo. She had been near, and I had been looking only at what I thought was in the picture. June said, "Mom used to watch your mother's porch when we drove through your town on the way to the doctor in Toledo. She would have me count the flower pots. She said it made her feel brave to be near the life she almost lived. She never let me out of the car. She never came to the door. She said that was one of her rules for staying alive." I closed my eyes and tried to gather the weight of that love and that fear and that discipline into my chest. We took a DNA test because science is a kind of mercy we didn't earn. It came back what you probably know from the way I'm telling this. June is my daughter. The day the results came, I did not do anything big. I made a grilled cheese. I walked to the mailbox twice. I called Mia and told her not to post anything about it on the channel. I sat in my truck and cried the way older men cry, not loud, not chopped, but steady and private. I cried for the 7 minutes I lost and the 7 minutes I was given, and for the project love is when it is serious about protecting a baby. Then I called June and said, "Where are you?" And she said, "I am around the corner." This is another twist you can't make up. June worked the past year as a real estate agent, and she had been the one to sell my friend Walt's house. She had given me a business card at a barbecue because she said, "You never know." That card was in my junk drawer under a roll of duct tape and a key to a shed that the shed's next owner probably changed already. Her eyes had caught mine that day, and I had thought she had a familiar way of squinting at the sun like it owed her a debt of warmth. I had not put it together. You don't put it together until someone lays it on the table and draws a circle around it with their finger. June and I started walking together in the evenings. She would tell me about her clients and how people say one thing about a home and mean another. I told her about 28 years of hearing the press in the plant like a god, and how you learn to count seconds when you're making stamped fenders. We didn't try to call ourselves father and daughter right away, because we needed to learn how to say each other's names. You can't throw a word like father around without respect for what it carries. The first time she called me, Dad was after I taught her the knot, the one for furniture and crosswinds. She sent me a text that said, "Thanks for the knot, Dad." I looked at that text a long time. I still have it starred. She asked me one evening, "Do you hate my mother for what she did?" Then backspaced and asked in a different way, "Did you hate her?" I said, "I did not hate your mother. I hated the crooked parts of the world that put rocks in her pockets and told her to swim. I hated the way men like David Turner can smile wrong and still get called decent by someone whose decisions are up to. I hated that the radiator gave that day. I hated my temper that made me hit a man under a flickery light and end up in a cell, and the way that gave him the satisfaction he had been hungry for. But I do not hate your mother. Your mother played Patsy Cline on a jukebox and ate sugar with a spoon and loved you like she had invented love. June asked if I had any of Claire's letters. I said, I have 5, and I could hear the hope in my own voice like a dog wagging a tail. I brought them out and we read them at the table where the burn mark sat like a watermark. The letters were plain. They said things like, I made peach cobbler and burned the crust and thought of your mother. They said, I am sorry for the other night. They said, I got a job at the clinic. They said twice, you were 7 minutes late and I forgave you as soon as I told myself the truth, which is that a man can be late and still be loyal. June told me about Mark. She said he was a goofy romantic who would leave notes on the inside of cabinet doors because he thought dinner making deserved to be congratulated. She said he taught her to change her own oil and would stop on the side of the road to help every single person who looked even a little confused about their spare tire. She told me he taught her to waltz in the kitchen and that he held her mother fiercely without squeezing. I asked her to bring me one of his notes, and she did. It said, you are the best even when the toast is black. It had a smiley face drawn the way a tired man draws a smiley face, a little lopsided and still cheerful. I put that note on my refrigerator, and it is still there. And sometimes when I heat my coffee, I read it and think about the project of love and how we all work on the same project, whether we know it or not. You might be wondering about David Turner. I got an answer where I didn't expect it, at a car wash. A man whose face I vaguely knew from the plant stopped me and said, you went after that Turner boy once. I said, I did. He said, he did time for tax fraud in the late 90s. Not for the things you think, the things he really did, but for the boring stuff. He said, he started a mini storage business and didn't pay payroll taxes. I stood there listening to the scrubbers and thought about how sometimes bad men get comeuppance in ways that don't feel like justice. I got in the truck and whispered to Claire like a crazy person talks to the air. I said, he did time for something stupid. You did time for something noble. You deserved better. Then I got home and there was a message on the machine from June that said, call me when you get a minute. So I stopped yelling at the air and called the living. There's one more turn to this story, and it is a quiet one. After a few months of walking and knots and learning how to argue about little things like how much salt belongs on corn on the cob, June took me to Harrisburg to see where her mother had died. It was a small hospice house with a neat garden and a bell you ring when someone passes, not to celebrate, but to mark it out loud. The nurse on duty remembered Claire. She said she was the one who listened to everyone else, like she had been paid to do that. She told us Claire had asked for a cassette recorder. We did not know about that. The nurse went to a back room and came out with a box. Inside were 6 little tapes, dates on them. 2 were addressed to June, 1 was addressed to Mark, 1 was addressed to me by first name only. 1 had no name. The nurse said, we tried to reach people, but the numbers on the intake form were too old, and then we moved buildings, and These got put in wrong place. I apologized to the nurse, like the whole thing was my fault. And then June took my hand and held it because she knows sometimes I pick up blame like a toddler picks up rocks. We drove back to Ohio with those tapes. We had to find a cassette player because time slips little tricks into your errands. We found one at a thrift store. In my kitchen, cradling the tape player like it was a little bird, we listened to Claire talk. Her voice had gotten lighter and wispier. She still sounded like a woman who didn't raise her voice unless the house was on fire. She told June things like, "Make your bed because it is the only part of the day you can finish quickly. And don't trust a man who keeps his anger under his hat and never lets you see it, because that kind of man will show it one day when the hat blows off." To Mark, she said, "Thank you for building the fort." To me, she said, "Hank, that second night, you put a quarter in the jukebox for Patsy Cline and told Donna it was for a future trouble that needed soothing. I lived off that quarter for a long time. I am sorry for the things I made you carry. I am grateful for the way you carried them anyway. I was going to call you the day the window broke. I was going to ask you to teach me the knot again, because I had forgotten it." She laughed and coughed and then said, "I forgive us. I hope you forgive me." June sat across from me with her hands folded and her face wet and still, somehow very calm. She pressed stop and rewound like it was a sacrament. She pressed play again. We let those words fill the kitchen that had heard so much else. The fall of a plate, the drag of a chair, the argument with Linda about the right way to fold towels. Now it was hearing something that would nest in the corner forever. The voice of a woman who had made a long, brave woman's choice and carried its weight beautifully. If you are wondering whether I wish I had stopped the wedding that day, the answer is yes and no. I wish I had not been late to the day and the reservoir and the world. I wish the radiator had held, and that farmer had not had to say good luck, son, and that a certain church had a back door that creaked more for me than for the others. But I do not wish Mark away. He saved lives in a different way than I would have. He taught June the difference between niceness and kindness, which might be the most important thing a father can teach. He loved Claire where she stood, with the light she had and the shadows right behind her. You can't be angry at that kind of love. You can only salute it like you salute a flag that means what it says for once. There is a fair bit more I could tell you. About the time June and I took a road trip and stood on the reservoir bend, and she tried to imagine a woman she never knew leaning against a car with a patched radiator hose. About how we saw the truck groove in the dirt where it would have been if anyone had cared to see it then. It isn't there, of course, but we saw it because we knew where to look. About how a man in a bait shop told me his wife's sister had worked with Claire and said she had a way with frightened kids. About how my mother, before she died, squeezed June's hands in both of hers and said, "Goodness, Gloria would be proud you came by." My mother said that because my grandmother had taught us all to keep extra forks for guests, and June brought her own fork one day, and my mother thought that counted double. So here's how I end this. To the folks watching who have someone you owe truth to, go tell them today. Don't wait for a cassette tape to do your talking. If you have a knot you can teach it. If you can keep someone safe by bearing a little pain in your own chest, bear it and consider it one of the better reasons to carry weight. If you love someone and the river of time split you apart, find a quiet corner and forgive yourself for the way you handled the rapids. We are built to make messes and to make meals. We do both every week. I know you came for drama and twist, and maybe you got some. Maybe you are wondering how it could be that a man waited decades and then got a knock on his door. I don't know either. I just know that the world is both cruel and kind in the same hour. And once in a while, it doesn't make you pick If this story found a soft spot in you, help me out. Like the video. It tells the strange math of this internet that a grizzled old line worker's voice is worth hearing. Leave a comment, even if it's just to say, I heard you, Hank. And please, subscribe. I meant what I said at the start. 96% of you aren't subscribed. That number makes me a little sad because it feels like everyone is standing outside the diner window listening to the music without coming in to sit. Slide on in. Take a stool. I've got more stories. Some of them are even hopeful on purpose. And I'll keep telling them as long as the coffee stays hot and there's someone who wants to learn a good knot.